Bonjour tout le monde! Welcome back to We in France. I'm Diane. Thank you for being here. We're going to get right into even more very normal American social habits that you'll want to avoid in France. I did a part 1 that I'll link here, so go watch that first so you're up to speed with what I talked about there. But here I'm back with even more commonplace and very widespread U.S. social habits that just aren't done in France. They aren't part of French culture, and they might even leave you or the French person a bit confused or even embarrassed or angry. And one social habit that is normal in France, just like the US, is talking about your family. Both French people and Americans take pride in their family and their kids, and it's a topic of conversation that's fair game on both sides of the Atlantic. To that end, I partnered with MyHeritage because family is everything, and since my mom passed away, I've been even more interested in tracing my roots. MyHeritage is the #1 family history service, and they make it easy and fun to build your family tree. Even if you have a small family or you don't know much about your family's origins, it is simple to research your family's roots and discover ancestry records and maybe even a new family member in the process. The site has over 19 billion historical documents that you could access via a few clicks. Everything is done via the MyHeritage website, and it's a piece of cake to build your family tree. You just start with yourself. You add your own name, your birthday, along with your parents' information, as well as your grandparents. And here I am adding my mom's name and her photo. And from there, MyHeritage helps you build your family tree by finding relatives. One way you can do that is through a feature called Instant Discoveries, and that helps you uncover even more distant family members and other records that'll help you uncover the various branches of your family tree, one person at a time. Then, once you've added family members, there's sometimes a brown icon in the top right corner of the person's name in the family tree, and that's going to alert you to any records matches that you can then review. And something funny is it actually found a photo of my dad's high school yearbook when he was like 17 or 18. I sent it to my brother and we both got a kick out of it. We love his glasses, very styling. And another interesting feature is that you can check immigration records if you have relatives like I did who came from another country. All I knew about my great-grandmother was her first name, that she came from Poland, and that she came to the US by way of Baltimore. So I entered what I knew. And surprisingly, it pulled the ship's passenger manifest over 120 years ago. And there was a photo of that record with her actual signature. And that was amazing to see. Totally unexpected. And then you just go ahead, click, and you save that record to the corresponding box on your family tree. Now, on my mom's side of the family, I found some old black and white photos that my parents had. I uploaded them, and then you could digitally repair them, enhance them, color them, and even animate them. And that feature, the animation, is my favorite. It's one that takes a click in about 3 seconds, and you could see what a family member looked like in motion and bring them back to life in a sense. And it was really beautiful to see an old photo modernized like this, and that's absolutely my favorite feature. Now, to try this out for yourself, for your family, sign up below via my link for a 14-day free trial to MyHeritage, and you'll enjoy all the amazing features this service has to offer. Now, if you decide to go on and continue your subscription, you're going to get a 50% discount. So go ahead, see if you can uncover any long-lost relatives, or at the very least, preserve history and document your family's legacy. It really is an amazing service. Thank you again to MyHeritage for partnering with me, and now back into it. So with that, let's jump right into part 2 of American social norms that you want to avoid in France. All right, number 1, saying a rhetorical, "Hi, how are you?" to people that you do not know. Now, in France, I've made a whole video all about how important it is to say bonjour, hello. And in the US, something that we'll add in addition to hello is this rhetorical, how are you? Now, in some cases, like with people you know, it's not rhetorical. It's a literal question. You're asking them, how are they doing? How are you? And you actually expect a response to it. Now, on the other hand, it is used rhetorically, like, I don't know, when you approach an employee at Starbucks, you get up to the counter, you could say, "Hi, how are you? I'd like a tall chai latte, please." And in this case, you're not expecting a reply. It's just an automatic part of the greeting. It's something we say after hi. Other times, we kind of say, "How are you?" to people we don't know, and we're expecting just a generic reply. Something like, "Oh, I'm okay," or "good," and we move on. We're not looking for a long, drawn-out answer to that question or like a big conversation. It's just something you say. Now, in France, you're not going to hear people using "how are you?" So the equivalent "ça va" or the more formal "comment allez-vous?" You're not going to hear that as an automatic greeting after bonjour with people that you don't know. Just the bonjour, that hello, it's sufficient. Now, if you do say ça va to someone, it's because you know them a little bit. Hey, what's up? How's it going? And the context is one which you actually plan to have a little bit of a conversation since you're an acquaintance or you're a friend of the person. It's not just a rhetorical thing you say. That would be strange. So a good rule of thumb is if you're in France, do not ask people how they're doing unless you know them a little bit, because the phrase is not used the same way in France. All right, number 2. So you'll have to tell me what your thoughts are on this, but every time I go back to the US now, I feel like the tipping culture, it's just gotten out of control in the US. Like I said, I don't know if it's regional. Truth be told, since the pandemic, I've only been to New Jersey, Georgia, Southern Florida, and Seattle in the US, but I feel like it's pretty countrywide, in my opinion, that since the pandemic, this tipping culture has ramped up even more than what it was just maybe a few years ago. I've seen tip request screens on payment terminals at places where there isn't any additional service being provided. People are making a wage. It's not volunteer. And I feel like there's always an option to leave a tip, either electronically, on a touch screen, a tip jar. And this goes well beyond the normal places, where we've always left tips, like nail salon, hair salon, housekeeping at a hotel, restaurant servers, that sort of thing. Tipping just seems to be this ubiquitous thing that we can't escape, and personally speaking, I think employers should pay employees a livable wage so they don't have to rely on tips to make ends meet. That's so stressful, and then it puts the onus on the customer to make up that difference. If you go to France, it's not as widespread. Tipping does exist, but you don't leave 20% for the waiter by default. Waiters are paid a living wage. You can, of course, round up to the nearest whole number, leave a few extra euros for a great meal, or round up in your change for coffee. In French culture, and actually probably a lot of Europe, you don't leave an obligatory 20% tip for the servers like we do in the US, or even more, right? And for me, I think this is a good thing. It could be really awkward, and it just seems like tipping is everywhere in the US, and it's just not the case in France. All right, next, eating burgers and pizza with your hands. Now, in the United States, it is totally normal to eat your burger, a slice of pizza folded over with your hands. Now, some people in the US, they use a knife and a fork, but it would be pretty normal to see people out and about eating pizza and burgers with their hands. Now, in France, it is the exact opposite. Most people cut their burgers and their pizza with a knife and a fork, and they eat it bite by bite without switching the silverware. Now, it wouldn't be rude to eat a burger with one's hands in France, but it's probably just a bit less common that it would be in the US, and maybe some types of people would view it as less classy. It also depends on the type of restaurant you're at. An exception would be, say, McDonald's, Burger King. You can absolutely eat your hamburger with your hands, no problem. Pick it up. I don't even think they give you a knife and fork. But if you're at a high-end restaurant, or if the pizza or burgers are particularly messy, I would say most French people, regardless, they go the knife and the fork route. Now, come to think of it, you probably wouldn't be served a burger or pizza at a very high-end restaurant, but I would say if you want to fit in with the French, opt for the knife and fork when you're eating a pizza or a burger. All right, next, delivering criticism softly sandwiched between two positives. Now, the French can be quite direct when delivering feedback in a professional context at work, or even in personal contexts, just being critical within your friend group or even your family. And that could be really off-putting if you're used to a more indirect or even softer style of communication. In the US, I feel like we tend to soften any criticism we have. We deliver it as tactfully as possible so as to not upset or even offend the person on the receiving end. Personal story, I remember my boss at a job I had after college teaching us about what he called the compliment sandwich. What you do is you sandwich a piece of critical feedback in between two pieces of bread, the two positives, so it doesn't come across too harshly. Another example, on the French side, when I came to teach English in French schools, back when I first came to France, I remember how strict the teachers were, even in elementary schools with 7, 8-year-old kids, as compared to American schools. The kids, they had to be these model pupils, sit there, no room for error. And I regularly saw young kids at the butt of sarcastic jokes from teachers. The kids who were more advanced, they excelled and they were rewarded, but the kids who maybe goofed off or less focused, less academically inclined, they weren't taken seriously as students, and they were given what I felt was pretty harsh feedback publicly in front of the class. There was no compliment sandwich, and feelings were not spared. Then yeah, maybe this would toughen up some kids, but other more sensitive kids, it might not work. And I would say overall, the French, they tend to be less afraid to share their criticism across all contexts, and this could come across as rude or even hurtful if you aren't used to it. Now, on the other hand, The French might find the softer, more indirect feedback, the more American way of kind of offering the feedback, as wishy-washy or possibly confusing. But regardless, whatever way you go in, I think one style should focus on kindness. Kindness should be the priority because there's a person on the other side. All right, next, being overly smiley. Now, Americans are known to be friendly and smiley almost to a superficial extent in some cases. Like, it's people's default expression to have this plastered on smile. That's not me. I'm no Pollyanna, let me tell you that. But I do feel like the phrase service with a smile, it comes from somewhere. And it's definitely intertwined with this good customer service experience that we come to expect in the US. Even outside of professional context, I do feel like it's normal for Americans to smile at people they pass, in smaller towns at least, at waiters, and all kinds of interactions. It's kind of our go-to first face, Now, in France, you'll notice that this is toned down quite a bit. A smiling face, it's not people's default face. And I'm not saying French people don't smile or look depressed or anything. That's not the case. I'm not saying that. But a smile, I would say, is reserved genuinely for being in a good mood or laughing and enjoying yourself. The French, they might even see an overly smiley expression kind of out of nowhere as someone being kind of crazy or possibly insincere or even suspicious. All right, next, saying grace, a prayer before dinner. In the US, it's relatively common to know someone in your family or friend group, maybe even you, who says a prayer before they eat their dinner. We refer to this as saying grace, and it's by no means the majority of American people, but it's not unheard of either. It's not unheard of for Christian families to say grace before dinner. Now, it's not a long, drawn-out thing. It's a quick prayer or an expression of thanks, usually under 30 seconds before a meal. Some families do it after, but you like a prayer, you say amen at the end, you talk about God, and it can be as elaborate as you want, but it's on the shorter side in general. Now, this Christian tradition, it's a blessing, and it's thought of as a way to sanctify the meal. We personally did not do this in my family, maybe just the holidays growing up, but my friend's family right next door, they did this even on casual weeknight dinners on a Tuesday every day. And I know people who do this, they're not super religious, they're not overly devout, but they still say grace. Now, in France, saying a prayer before your meal would be reserved for very religious people. It is not something common, and French people might even find it a bit strange if you said a prayer before your meal, and they might feel awkward being around that. And there's actually this funny meme, if I could find it, I'll put it up. Something on social media, it says, the French don't need to pray before they eat. They know how to cook. And that was funny. All right, next, small talk. Small talk, I've told you before, it is not as prevalent in France, at least not in the same way. And it would be a bit unusual to strike up a random conversation like we do in the US with, say, a stranger in line at the pharmacy, to ask someone where they bought that great sweater they're wearing, or, oh, I really like your shoes. They remind me of ones I had years ago, or whatever, right? And this is because the French, they make a distinction between the public and the private sphere. And this could be really confusing for outsiders. It took me many years to really grasp the nuances, and I've made an entire video dedicated to this topic, so I'm not going to rehash everything here. I don't need to repeat it. But the video is nuanced. Definitely watch it to the end. I'll link that above just so you kind of understand the context. And if you're wondering, well, Diane, if the French don't do small talk, how do you get to know them? I cover it all in my video, so watch it. And as I always say, this is not a judgment call on what country's social norms are better or worse across the board. There's no perfect anywhere. The United States are obviously two very different countries, and it's only normal that social habits don't translate. So my point here is all about helping you to be more prepared, for you to be more aware when you interact with the French, just to get more informed about French culture and be prepared when you come to France. All right, so I want to hear from you down below in the comments, as usual, if anything stood out to you or surprised you. If you're a foreigner in France, maybe you can relate. And also, if you're a French person who has left France, you're in the US, let me know what you think about our social norms that maybe caught you by surprise. For even more tips, if you haven't checked out my ebook on what to do and what not to do in France, it's only a few bucks. It looks like this, and it's linked below, called 75 Beginner France Travel Tips for a Standout Trip. And for my fellow Francophiles out there, as we're approaching the holiday season, I just released the We in France Francophile gift guide for all your France-inspired holiday shopping needs over on the blog. Check it out below. It features 25 items that I either personally own or have tried over the years, many of which are made in France. They're really standout products. I stand behind them. So yeah, if you want to support my channel, that is a great way to do it. Check that out. Thank you for being here. Thank you again to MyHeritage for sponsoring my video. I appreciate it. See you back here on We in France soon. Salut!